Welcome to Carol and Gary's See America Tour. Hello again, everyone. Carol, Jasper, and I left Pensacola on Monday, November 25th on Interstate 10 East. After approximately an hour drive, I turned south on Highway 331 and drove another 30 minutes. When we reached Highway 98, I turned east again for the final drive into Panama City. On Tuesday, November 26th, Carol and I drove to St. Andrews State Park and then took this shuttle boat to Shell Island. Shell Island is a 7-mile-long barrier island approximately 15 minutes from St. Andrews State Park. By definition, a barrier island is a long sandy island lying parallel to a shore that is built up by the action of waves, currents, and winds that protects the shore from the effects of the ocean. During our ride to Shell Island and returning, we saw several dolphins swimming nearby. Our boat captain slowed down so that we could watch the dolphins and take pictures. Shell Island, as the name implies, contains millions of shells that have washed up on the shore from the Gulf of Mexico. There is no food, no water, or restrooms available on Shell Island. You have to take anything with you that you think you might need. And there are no trash containers on Shell Island, so anything you take with you needs to come back. They are trying very hard to keep Shell Island natural. Shell Island is approximately 3/4 of a mile across at its widest point, but strings held up by posts and signs ask you to stay on the beach and out of these natural areas. Our boat captain warned that it was 15 miles around Shell Island and that if we missed the last boat back to St. Andrews State Park at 4 p.m., we would be spending the night there. You can rent a pontoon boat at St. Andrews State Park and drive yourself to Shell Island or use your own boat and park anywhere you want to, but basically everyone who visits Shell Island follows the same path along the shore looking for shells and then follows the same path back to the boat drop-off point. This is a view of Shell Island after we walked ahead of the crowd. While waiting for the shuttle boat to take us back to St. Andrews State Park, I saw a little girl on the beach intently watching the sand. When I asked her what she was looking at, she said that there was a sand crab that kept popping its head out of the hole in the sand. I promised her that if I could catch the sand crab on video, she'd be able to see it on YouTube. So Jessica, if you're watching, here's your sand crab. On Thursday, November 27th, we took Jasper and drove back out to St. Andrews State Park. St. Andrews State Park is a 1,200-acre park with several short walking trails, a small lake, and a large beach area. This is Gator Lake. There are supposed to be alligators in this lake, but we didn't see any. We did see this turtle. Within Gator Lake is a small island where blue heron hang out. If you remember from our stop in Lafayette, Louisiana during July 2018, this area is called a rookery. After watching the birds, we drove to a swampy area where we saw a snowy egret fishing. A short distance from the snowy egret, a blue heron was also fishing. Near where we boarded the shuttle boat yesterday, I saw this deer while Carol was looking for shells along the beach. On our way back to the car, we saw this shrubbery-looking growth on the ground. Unfortunately, further investigation showed that it was a fallen tree, not shrubbery. A nearby sign said this is sable palmetto, or sable palm for short, and that it's also known as cabbage palm. It is Florida's state tree. On Saturday, November 30th, Carol and I visited the Man in the Sea Museum in Panama City. Early diving efforts involved numerous imaginative devices, including breathing tubes, leather sacks, inflated animal skins, and just holding your breath while carrying heavy rocks. Though primitive, such actions indicated man's ancient desire to explore the ocean depths. Underwater diving can be broken down into two categories: surface diving and deep water diving. In surface diving, which includes scuba diving, divers wear a breathing apparatus that is connected to an air supply. Recreational divers often wear oxygen tanks on their back. Commercial divers are normally connected to a breathing apparatus on shore or on board a ship, barge, or platform. Typically, commercial divers work in pairs, one underwater and one on the surface tending to the hoses and equipment. Surface divers can work safely at depths up to 300 feet, but they can only spend a limited amount of time underwater. I did a great deal of reading about decompression sickness while preparing this portion of the video, but rather than bore you with all of the details, let me just say that if you dive too deep, you will have problems with nitrogen in your body when you return to the surface. Decompression sickness, which is also known as the bends, happens when nitrogen in your body forms bubbles in your tissue, something like the way a soda bottle bubbles when uncapped. Gas bubbles in the tissue cause pain, paralysis, and even death. After a deep dive, a diver needs to decompress gradually, returning very slowly to the surface in order to avoid decompression sickness. Decompression time is relative to the depth and duration of the dive. With a deep dive of only 1 hour, decompression time can take days. In the mid-1950s, a Navy doctor named George Bond, who at the time was director of the United States Navy Submarine Medical Center, conducted experiments that showed that a diver's tissue becomes saturated with nitrogen after a certain time of exposure. After the saturation point is reached, the duration of the dive is unimportant. A diver could remain under pressure for weeks or months. The time needed for decompression would be the same whether the diver stayed at the saturation point for an hour or a week. The results of Dr. Bond's experiments became known as saturation diving and were proven in a pressurized underwater chamber named Sea-Lab. Sea-Lab 1 was lowered off the coast of Bermuda on July 20, 1964 to a depth of 192 feet below the ocean surface. Divers were then lowered to Sea-Lab in a pressurized diving bell. 4 divers were to stay submerged for 3 weeks, but the experiment was halted after 11 days due to an approaching tropical storm. The Sea-Lab 1 chamber is on display at the Man in the Sea Museum. It sits on metal stilts as it did underwater so that you can see how divers entered and departed through a hole in the underside. The entry hole has been covered for safety, but stairs have been built alongside the structure so that you can go inside to look around. Carol and I watched approximately an hour-long video about Sea-Lab while at the museum. I'm going to provide a link to that video in the comments section of this video. It was extremely interesting. The museum also had equipment on display that was used by Navy SEALs. In fact, the idea of this museum came from former Navy SEALs. This is a swimmer delivery vehicle. It was used by Navy SEALs and underwater demolition teams. It is free-floating or a wet sub with battery-powered motors. They were often piggybacked to their destination on the deck of a submarine. Divers wore wetsuits with oxygen rebreathers such as this one so that their oxygen bubbles did not give away their position. We were hesitant to visit the Man in the Sea Museum because everything outside the building looked run down, but we were totally surprised once we entered the museum. I would highly recommend a visit to this museum. And with that, I'm going to close out this video and get it uploaded so that we can get ready to drive to Tallahassee on Wednesday. If you like this video but have not yet subscribed, please do so to be notified of future videos, and as always, feel free to share with your friends. Thanks for watching.